Hello and welcome to Audible Anomaly, the podcast where we foster deep and meaningful conversation to help get you through your darkest days. I'm your host, Josh, and in today's episode, we are taking a hard look at burnout, what causes it, and what we can do to overcome it. But in order to have a discussion, I need to have people to have a conversation with, so let's take a look at my lovely friends. They happen to also be here to join us for the conversation about burnout, so let's catch up with them. Let's see how they're doing. Let's go over to Davey. How was your week?
My week was good. It was nothing too stressful, nothing too strenuous. Still waiting to hear back about a couple things, but nothing too big. I've gotten more into Final Fantasy 14, which my roommates have been really wanting as of late. And with a lot of more people getting into it, I was just like, I'll get right back into it. And I got to a point where I'm like falling in love with the game again. So I'm really happy about that.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I saw you streaming it a couple times.
Mhm.
Looked fairly interesting. I'll definitely enjoy watching you play. Not my cup of tea, but that's okay.
That's fair.
All right. Kevin, how about you? How was your week?
Not too bad. Got a little bit sick midweek, but nothing big. So otherwise, just a normal week.
It's always, especially post-pandemic, like it's always interesting when you get a little bit sick. You're just like, you get a little more worried than maybe you did before.
Sure.
But yeah, glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How about your own week?
Yeah, so I think really the main standout for this week was I started the 50 reps challenge. There's so many different iterations of this, but effectively the way that I went was 50 squats, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, and the optional thing that I added was 50 rows, bent over rows. So literally doing that every single day. I know when I was doing like the band workouts, the weighted stuff, you're doing like 3 sets of like 15, which is 45. So then you just take out the weights, do your own body weight, and then try and do it every day. So it's been very interesting. I think I finished day 4. Today is day 5 as we're recording this. Weirdly enough, I don't feel very sore today. So I'm hoping that's a good thing and a trend in the right direction. Maybe it can start increasing the volume a little bit as my body adapts. But other than that, didn't really do much other than a lot of research for the day's episode on burnout. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. I thought it'd be a good place to kind of start with WTF is actually burnout, right? Looking at what is the official, if there is one, definition of burnout. So the World Health Organization have defined burnout as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. A couple of the symptoms that they outline are feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or negativity and cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional effectiveness. The thing that I wanted to note is, well, they specifically target workplace stress. I don't necessarily think it's particularly isolated to the workplace. Students often experience it while going through, higher education. And another one that really isn't talked about, but we're seeing a lot more of, is being in bad relationships and toxic relationships in general can actually burn you out as well, which is definitely interesting. For the most part, though, today we'll be talking about kind of the workplace stress, directly more applicable to workplace and student, since when you're a student, technically your occupation is studying and being a student. So it'll trick into those, but a lot of what we talk about here should still relate, especially to the overall theme, as we'll get into a little bit later, of stress management, and that'll end up being its own separate podcast, but we'll get into that when we get into that. But the next natural question is, have either of you guys, and myself included, ever experienced burnout? the first and most relative experience that I can think of is me and Davey, our last employer. I feel was very much kind of that. I'm not sure if you want to rehash some of like the symptoms, what you went through, and if there's another time that you experienced burnout.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced burnout in the last 3 major jobs that I've worked at. And for me, it always stems from lack of movement and stagnation in the job. Because I'm a person who always likes change. I always need things to change and things to remotivate me and things to really attach to my brain. And that's like the huge ADHD in me of just like things need to be constantly changing or else like I can't focus on it anymore. So I really feel burnout pretty early into work and pretty heavily. It's really tough on me. A lot of my symptoms come from like just complete shutdown. You know, a lot of the times in work, I think the biggest place I recognize it is after work when I get home and I shut down. I'm not tired, but I'm asleep at 8 o'clock at night. I want to go and do these things after work, but I never do. I don't eat. I don't, communicate with people. There has been plenty of times, especially with my last job and the job before that, where I just didn't even say anything to my roommates. I walked in the house, I opened my door, and I closed it, lights off, laying in bed, and just kind of laying there. A couple times even just breaking down crying. It's just like that stagnation gets to me, and a lot of employers, unfortunately, like to promise that they'll change things, they'll move you, you're performing well, we'll do things for you, but they never happen, and that only increases that problem for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. How about you, Kev?
Yeah, I definitely had faced burnout in our first job together. Similarly, it was just a lot of the same thing day in, day out. No real change to it all. Do it for long enough and you get there.
Yeah, you lose that sense of like reward and motivation for sure. Yeah, I think the most notable time, other than the most recent experience, was when I took a call center job, dealing with 100+ phone calls a day. Ooh, back to back, they can be really grueling. And I remember it was a 5-week training course, and I think after like the first 2 weeks were like going over the system and like learning stuff, and then they kind of throw you on calls, and you start getting a feel for the job, and you're just like, I remember there was days where I'm just like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, I'm already like kind of regretting this, but then I ended up getting into a different department, which ended up working out a lot better, and that led to better things down the road. But yeah, like it's crazy how much we tend to, and we're seeing this, it's a very common theme as we'll get into the stats a little bit later, of just continually working and pressing. And there's this notion, especially in American society, of like, do more and be better and work and hustle, and that'll lead to fruition, which isn't always necessarily the case. But I thought, yeah, it's just, it sucks and is a very crappy position to be in. But hopefully, after today's episode, we'll see a little bit better how we can handle it. I thought this would be a very good time to look at our audience responses, since the prompt was, have you guys, the audience, ever experienced burnout? Shout out a social media blast. And we got a couple of responses. If you aren't following us on social media, at Audible Anomaly. So we'll start with Aspiring Fate. And I'll try and run through these because they are a little bit long, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, yeah, you had to such an experience, but we'll try and run through these real quick and respond to all of them at the end. Okay. So, Aspiring Fate says, when I worked at the call center on one of my most recent jobs, it really hit me hard. Thankfully, going on a nice vacation helped me reset, and I've been fine ever since. Awesome. At Kelly, I'm pretty positive I felt burnout when I worked at a major department store chain. I first worked at their outlet store for about 5 years. It was really more of a quote college job, but I stayed for about a year after I graduated. I think burnout occurs most often when your work environment becomes toxic, being micromanaged, no benefits or promotions offered, or no positive changes. You do the same stuff and then you realize that you have better potential elsewhere. It was hard at first because I got comfortable and was content working there, and I didn't really want to leave. Eventually, my managers thought I was ready to work for the main department store, which only lasted about 3 months because it was less work, but it was more sales driven, less base pay, but offered commission. And I don't think the managers really liked me there as much. To me, it felt wrong forcing someone to buy some ridiculously overpriced fashion item that they'll likely only use once and probably return afterward. I definitely did not like working there, even though it was relatively easy. I didn't get the respect I deserved compared to everyone else. Yeah, definitely emotional burnout there, for sure. Next, we have Meerkat. I've been working hard nonstop since I was younger. I was homeschooled, which allowed me to start attending college classes at the age of 14. Graduated high school at 16. Got my first associate's degree at 18, second at 19, and bachelor's degree at 20. From there, I got hired as a restaurant supervisor, with my ultimate goal becoming the general manager at some point. Well, that came quicker than I anticipated. At age 24, I became the GM of a multi-million-dollar revenue restaurant at a major amusement park. Of course, I was super happy and proud. Then things started to change. I started working more, had less support from upper management of the park. The expectations got more and more unrealistic. I was extremely stressed and was working about 70 to 80 hours a week, 6, sometimes even 7 days a week. I was salaried, so there's really no cap for me. I was able to last around 2 years before I started seeing major changes in my health. It started to decline pretty rapidly. I started getting headaches often. I would feel dizzy and get tightness in my chest with minor shortness of breath. I was having trouble sleeping, but was constantly feeling fatigued. And then I had a rash appear on my face, and overall I just started feeling really depressed. I was able to get out of that environment into what I thought would be a better job for me, an assistant manager, only working around 50 hours a week. Unfortunately, I was still very stressed in that position. And looking back now is possibly from not letting myself ever really take a break from pushing myself. And as a result, my health declined even more. Along with everything else, I had high blood pressure, was having daily panic attacks, got a really bad pain in my back and chest, and started having issues with my stomach and coughing uncontrollably after eating anything. After around 5 more months, it finally got to the point where I went to the doctor. I was diagnosed with severe generalized anxiety and depression, and was told that stress was causing pretty much all of my symptoms. I was basically told that I needed to take some time off to try and relax, or I could up in the hospital very easily. I ended up taking a little over 2 months off per doctor's orders and started some medication to help with the anxiety and depression. It's been almost 4 years since then, and honestly, I still struggle with those symptoms and issues to this day. I never really thought that burnout was a thing or that stress could really affect one's health so heavily. Absolutely. All right, moving on here. We have the photographer who hits us with the joke first. The first time I experienced burnout was when I held the brakes on my truck and floored the accelerator. Just kidding. No, but it all started when I was a young student hellbent on getting a specific job when working on my master's degree program. I studied technology management and gave the program everything I had because I was chasing a dream. During the spring semester, I was taking the maximum number of credits I could, while also working 4 jobs, technically. I was a grad assistant, worked at my apartment complex, traveled for photography, and was working at a liquor store. You could say I was always on the go. I started to notice a burnout when I wasn't sleeping as much and I was drinking more for all the wrong reasons. I was stressed out to the point where I was making bad decisions, shutting off friends and family, and was always depressed and feeling drained. I managed to survive the semester, but I had to take the summer off. I didn't take any classes that summer, and I left 2 of my jobs. All I had left was the liquor store and the travel photography, which realistically was only 2 months out of the year. So, what did I do with all that newfound time? Whatever the heck made me happy. I bought a bike, started yoga, going to the gym daily. Really, I did anything that didn't need a schedule besides worked. And oh boy, how it helped. And our last one is at Wubs. I definitely feel like I've been experiencing burnout at my current job. The pandemic hit us really hard, but lately I found a rather funny thing that's helped me cope. I started talking to a girl at my job. Talking to her and being around her has definitely restarted my brain. It was awesome to see. But yeah, as you can see, like it's crazy how drastically different, burnout does affect people. I mean, we have Kelly who suffered emotional, burnout of this not feeling like she was valued or like the reward was worth the amount of effort she was putting in. You have Meerkat who's pretty much working herself into the ground. Photographer, much of the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild how the body reacts. But yeah, I want to run over some stats here.
Okay.
If you guys don't have anything else to add to really the reaction.
No, I mean, for me, it's just that amount of like the different types of burnout that they were experiencing. I mean, just overall, like Meerkat and the photographer was experiencing very much that same of like, I'm gonna work myself to the bone. Oh crap, I've hit the bone. That's not good. Like it's kind of that people always tout. You gotta work until you're dead, but it's without realizing. Oh, the work is killing me. Like that's what's sending me to my grave. Because, even if necessarily you don't experience all these symptoms that they're experiencing, there's a huge strain on your body nonetheless. One you may not feel now, but you're going to feel in the future. It's something like a lot of athletes experience as well, right? They're in the prime of their lives and they're putting all of this stress and pressure on their body almost every day. But 10 years down the line, they're going to feel it. They're going to realize that a lot of the muscles and joints and stuff has worn down after extraneous amount of use. Your brain is the same.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you see it with like hockey and soccer players. Like by 40, they're done.
Yep.
Like
football, even less most of the time.
Yeah. You're already old if you're like 35, and really a lot of these sports, 30 is even already getting up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's mind blowing, and yeah, you're very right. The brain is yet another muscle that we can see decline, as we'll get into a little bit later. It's just crazy. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add, Kev.
Not really. I mean, it was interesting seeing how different people reacted to it differently, from Kelly's just getting out of there entirely to something like taking up a new hobby or finding a girl to talk to just pushing through.
Yeah. I mean, all of them are ways to get around it. It's just whatever ends up being the best for you. Sometimes a change of scenery is nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's take a quick look at the stats of burnout. So, a couple of polls and surveys that were done found that 75% of workers have experienced burnout, with 40% saying they've experienced it specifically during the pandemic. Which, I mean, obviously it exacerbated a lot of issues and changed a lot of things for really everyone and potentially for the foreseeable and long-term future. It's crazy how much the pandemic has really kicked a lot of things off. 95% of HR leaders cite burnout as one of the leading causes for why employees quit. And what's even more scary is that the majority of them said they honestly don't know how they can help. 36 of employees said their organization isn't really doing anything to help them with burnout again, because HR really doesn't know. They're not equipped with the tools or anything to help with it. And here's another kind of scary one we'll throw at you. 21% of workers say that they were able to have open, productive conversations with HR, which is nice. However, 56% went so far to say that HR didn't encourage those conversations. And I think that's a bit more, scary than not really knowing how to deal with it, but just not even willing to have that conversation and acknowledge it, really, and almost dismiss it.
And then that's the problem. And then I think that's the problem with HR as it is, because HR is there for the company, not for the employees. So a lot of times, I'm sure it comes down to it's just better for the company if they don't talk about it, because that means the company doesn't have to address it or work on it.
Yeah. This is the unfortunate part. Yeah. And then the last stat here, burnt out employees are 23% more likely to visit the emergency room, which for a lot of people can end up being like, the realization that, hey, you're burnt out. And it's crazy that we're not identifying it sooner, that we allow it and we think it's okay for it to sometimes get to that point, but yeah, let's take a look at the science of burnout and what is kind of actually contributing to it, right? Like what it does in your body. And it's kind of crazy. Like I said, a lot of it is tied with stress and the stress response. So we'll kind of go over a little bit like the stress cycle, like what happens within the body. So what's very interesting is regardless of whatever the cause of the stress is or the stressor, your body kind of reacts the same way, right? It sees this threat, and it the way your body reacts is inherently the same, right? We've kind of evolved to have cortisol, which is the stress hormone, as we often hear it referred to as, which back in the day was not necessarily a bad thing. It's what engages our fight or flight or freeze, which I always forget freeze, is one of them. It is responsible for that reaction within our body, right? It's why when we see a lion, ideally you want to run, and try and maybe not fight it or freeze, and it's developed to where now we're not being chased by a lion anymore. It's family or something else, right? It's very different. So what ends up happening, right? And we'll kind of peel back the stress cycle. We have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is when we perceive that threat, when we see that lion, right? The middle is you do something with your body. Adrenaline kind of surges through you, and then eventually cortisol. And then the end is your body's like, hey, you're clear. You outran that lion. It got, scared or whatever, or tired and just ran away, and you're no longer in danger. You're okay. Everything is good, right? That's the stress cycle. The problem is that a lot of the issues, especially that we're dealing with now, like I said, aren't that line. They're chronic stressors, things that are reoccurring, right? Your long commutes, your consistent pressure at work, maybe family issues, right? Relational things. So what ends up happening is when we deal with chronic stress, our bodies try to respond and adapt. What ends up happening is that having that chronic stress, it ends up increasing the activity and the neural receptors within the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, while also deteriorating the signals within your hippocampus, which is where you have your learning, some of your memories, and the stress control part of your brain. So not only is it increasing your anxieties, increasing your fears, it's also decreasing your ability to deal with stress. when you don't deal with it properly, which is kind of nuts, right? And the main thing, and I think this is where we're starting to see this burnout, right? Is just because you deal with the stressors doesn't necessarily mean you've dealt with the stress. The stress cycle doesn't necessarily complete, right? We need to tell our bodies that those stressors have been taken care of, and there's a couple of different ways you can kind of do that. The most common ones are like, let's say you had a long commute. What typically happens? That jerk cut you off, you're angry, you try to go into your house and you're like, okay, I'm going to relax. And then like, realistically, you're still pissed off about that jerk and you're like, I'm going to relax. I said I'm going to relax, and you get like, you carry that anger inside. So one thing you can do is like, you can go for a walk around the block real quick before you enter your house. You can do some jumping jacks, just, or you can even like tense up every muscle in your body for like 10 seconds. What this does is it, instead of having the cortisol still rushing through you and the anger, which actually does manifest itself in your body, which is another crazy thing. What it does is it releases, a little bit of the adrenaline, a little bit of serotonin that we see like with exercise, right? We hear exercise is good for making you feel happy. And it tells your body that the stressor is done, and it allows your body to complete that cycle. And we'll look at a couple more later on to try and recover from the burnout. But it's really important that we realize that it's really a two-step process, right? You deal with the stressor, right? For a long commute, it's a little bit easy. You get home. But then you also have to deal with the stress, and these have to be separate, right? You have to tell your body, I am no longer feeling the stress, or I'm no longer dealing with that. I am in a different place now. It is okay to be within my body and to it's a safe place now. Which, honestly, when I kind of stumbled across that, is mind-blowing. Like, and the fact that it's not talked about more, kind of scary. Another thing that stress can do as well, the chronic stress, is actually shrink the overall size of your brain. Like your brain will actually atrophy, which is crazy to me.
Makes sense why when I knock on my head, it's very hollow.
Yeah. I mean, you can hear the little peanut kind of rattling around in the shell.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. We're just kidding.
I'm not. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that is the science of burnout and what happens with chronic stress. So the most important thing, though, that we have to take away is how can we detect burnout? Right? Because, like I said, a lot of us tend to find out a little bit too late. And we definitely have to listen to our bodies, and that's something that we don't do enough of in general, a lot of the time. Fire hot, but you still put your hand over it sometimes, So one of the quickest and easiest ways that you can detect burnout is that feeling that you don't want to go to work anymore, right? Like you're like, you're dragging your feet to really like, I really don't want to go to work. I want to like be anywhere else but work right now, right? That's like usually a very good first indicator that, hey, you're starting to get to that point of burnout. Whether it's emotionally, whether it's, a little bit, stressfully or whatever, right? Like it's one of those where you're starting to realize that maybe I need to change something up here, right? And you should start, when you identify that, you should really start saying, okay, what do I need to change? Because something has to change. Because if you continue down that same path, it's pretty much the definition of insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Well, It's not going to happen. If you continue down that path, we kind of know what's going to happen. Nothing good, right? Another common way you can identify it is you have this short fuse and you're very snappy and like, you get cranky really quickly. Like I tend to do that whenever I've noticed that a handful of times whenever I've been in that burnout where literally doesn't matter what it is, it's the smallest of things, right? And it just like sets me off. I'm like, I don't even know why I'm mad right now. I'm just absolutely livid, and I shouldn't be. Realistically, like, you forgot to put the lid back on the mayo. How dare you? You don't even like mayo, type things. So, yeah, and I think what's very very interesting is that there's a very interesting correlation between burnout and depression, and they're similar but also very different. One of the quickest ways you can kind of spot the difference of like general depression, right, versus kind of burnout is depression. You no longer get satisfaction from things that used to make you feel good, right? Like I've been there where like I'm like I really don't want to play video games even though I know I love video games, right? Like I don't find that satisfaction in it. Whereas burnout, it'd be like, oh man, I can't wait to go home, literally do anything else but play some video games. Like Rocket League, let's go. Right? So the common example is like when you're depressed, you can be flown out to like an exotic beach, have a margarita, lying in a hammock, yet still feel miserable. Like it doesn't change you. And of course that's an overgeneralization and an oversimplification of it. But a lot of burnout and depression kind of look the same, and long-term burnout can even lead to depression and anxieties because it's, again, that stress response that we're getting within the brain, which is kind of nuts. But overall, there are three, like I mentioned, there were three symptoms, right, that we covered. And these are the three ways you can detect whether or not it is burnout. It's constantly feeling tired or exhausted, specifically and particularly emotionally. Right? Like you're just mentally drained, you're kind of checking out or starting to check out, you're just not feeling like you want to do anything. Like you mentioned, Davey. You end up going home, you don't need to talk to anyone, just shut the door and you're just lying there. You're just tired, even though physically you didn't really do much, potentially, right? So what's interesting is in the overarching, like when you look at everything as a whole, this is one, like obviously women versus men, we respond differently to different things, other genders, etc., might respond a little bit differently, but the overarching theme is that women tend to feel this one a little bit more. They may feel all three, but at least in studies that have been done on at least the binary genders, women tend to fall under the emotionally drained and exhausted a bit more. Men tend to suffer from the next one where you can identify burnout, which is depersonalization. This is the experience of like feeling detached from yourself, like you're kind of separating yourself emotionally from work. You feel like you're just going through the motions every day instead of like actually living in it, right? It's that thing of like you fall into the habit and you're kind of just doing it to do it rather than because you want to, right? And I definitely feel like I feel this one the most. Other than any like other stress response like stomach issues or anything else that I've had. And then the last one is the reduced sense of personal accomplishment. This is like you're literally doing everything that you're being asked of, but you don't feel like you're really getting anything out of it. You're kind of like, what's the point, right? Like, why am I even doing this? You work harder and harder for less and less sense of what you're doing matters. You no longer have that sense of like, I did something, I did a thing, right? So, of these, I'm curious, like, what you guys have, now that you're kind of know a bit more about burnout, and now that you've had the baseline of like science and how to detect it, like going back to your burnout stories, um, you know, did you notice any of these in you, and like kind of just digest it all, get your feedback on it?
Well, the one I felt the most, and the one I just regularly feel the most is that exhausted and tired, specifically emotionally. I all the time, especially with when I'm feeling burned out in a job, it's just I no longer want to talk to people. I'm already just drained and exhausted, and I feel like my whole day's been taken up by just work. No matter how much work I did, I'm already just kind of done with the day, and it takes everything out of me.
Yeah. How about you, Kev?
I'm in a very similar position, definitely with the exhaustion, tiredness, not so much emotionally, but just go straight to sleep. Yeah, very similar.
Yeah. Like I said, I've already kind of mentioned where, like, for me, it tends to be the kind of going through the motions of separating. I definitely feel the exhaustion, like, overall as well. And then, like I said, obviously it leads into other physical things. But yeah, like it's kind of crazy because, like I said, this has a lot of parallels with just general stress and like I said, they're very closely associated. But it's really important to know, when you're starting to reach that point of burnout, even if, like I said, it's just the beginning. At that point, just being a bit more aware of it will definitely help you start having those conversations and, how to get past it. So we'll look at the next section, which is how to overcome burnout. And I feel like in an overarching theme, it seems that there are two predominant kind of categories. There's your active, like what you actively do to change it, and your proactive, your stuff to prevent it from happening, or you know kind of setting a foundation for you to be set up for success, right? And the always the most important step is recognizing the burnout symptoms, right? You have to be aware of any problem in order to solve that problem, right? So, I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, it does mean that we find that tipping point, and we end up getting hospitalized, or something ends up happening where we realize, hey, you know what? That was a little bit far. Definitely need to rope it back, right? Hopefully, you don't get to that point, but if it does, looking at it like from a different perspective, right? Rather than seeing that as a failure, look at it like, okay, that's definitely the line. How can I avoid ever coming close to that line? And, there's, like I said, there's this balance between effort, how much work you're putting into something versus that reward, right? Not necessarily monetarily, but, if you're working at, let's say, like a hospital, right? Like you get that satisfaction from, saving lives and helping people be better health wise, right? So you always have to find that balance. And anytime it gets shifted, that's where you definitely need to recognize something needs to be done here, right? Uh, Not always, especially if you have the perceived that you're doing a lot of effort for, low reward. I mean, sometimes that could be you have to identify burnout versus greed, right? Where you think you deserve to be paid more when realistically maybe you don't. But just making sure that you're in a happy, healthy balance is important. There's a couple of quotes that I really did like in doing all the research for this episode. It takes discipline to do less. And the fastest way to burnout is thinking you can solve all your problems by doing more. Those are so very true. Knowing your limit, right? Being able to be proactive is already setting you up a bit better for success. So, once you recognize, hey, burnout might start happening here, one of the most important things is try and have an open dialogue with HR, right? Just try and be open. Hopefully they're receptive. And if they're not, well, at least you know where your kind of support system lies. And that's kind of where, in general, I think, we need to build, we'll call it this bubble of love, at home or with friends, or even just seek out medical help, with like a therapist or someone. I think we all need a support system of some sort, right? We're not meant to tackle life alone. It's part of the reason why we're starting this endeavor and we're trying to build a community and, get that ball kind of rolling so we can lean on each other and, just get through this thing that we call life. But I think one of the most important things is whatever that bubble of love or whatever that support system is, it has to be okay to express feelings with no judgment, right? With, you can't make it taboo, right? You can't like be stuck in this like isolation bubble, right? Because the chances are, not always, but sometimes if you feel like you're isolated and like, oh, I can't really go to someone or something, to really like lean on them or whatever, like I don't want to worry them. Well, chances are you building that wall, there's someone else on the other side of that wall who possibly feels the exact same way, right? You never really know. And it's one of those where it's like you have to kind of extend an olive branch and just be like, hey, like, is it okay if if I talk to you about something? And like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be friends or roommates or, your hopefully it is your loved one. But if you don't feel comfortable with maybe some things, having that support system, in a therapist or someone you can, reach out to and get through these things. At the end of the day, you have to build a system where you care for others' feelings and they care about yours. I think that is like foundational, especially in really any relationship, frankly, which like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about next week. But, once you have that support system, like that is going to be the foundation that you build everything else on top of, frankly. Because if you have a shaky support system, you're going to have a shaky house, and it may not always end up great. You can thrive for a little while, but eventuality, probably best just to have a couple of friends. Maybe start a podcast or something, whatever you need to do. So the next couple of ones are actually like some science-based tips where if you are dealing with stress, we kind of mentioned it before, like move your body, frankly, start an exercise routine, go for a walk, heck, even start meditation or mindful routine, like a mindfulness routine, like even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes, right? We all need, we're kind of think of like your mental health almost like your phone, right? When you have 5% on your phone, most likely you're going to go plug it in. Maybe you can't plug it in, all night to get a full charge, but you need a little quick jolt to get you to 20% so you survive for the rest of the day, right? And that's where like going for a walk or like a breathing routine or a meditation routine or a mindfulness routine, like even at work. Like even if you just take like your 10-minute break to just like decompress and like move your body or get yourself into different headspace, that'll go a long, long way. Working out, especially, helps your hippocampus, right? What we mentioned, the learning, the memories, the stress control. It helps it actually grow while also helping to, decrease your cortisol levels, your stress levels. So it's like you can kind of counteract that by like just doing stuff, right? Move your body. Another one, and hopefully you can find someone, especially right now in the post-pandemic world, or the beginning to be post-pandemic world, where you can hug someone you care about for 20 seconds. I only say someone you care about because if you hug a stranger, it might be a little weird. But, generally speaking, hugging someone for 20 seconds, especially if it's someone you care about, like releases tension in your body. It lowers your heart rate. Like you just start to feel good. And it goes so much to de-stress, right? And then the most important, or not the most important one, but one of the more important ones is prioritizing sleep. Don't sacrifice it. We have this notion of like, oh, if I sleep for 4 hours a day, I can be productive for 20. It's like, well, yeah, but for how long can you sustain that? You might be able to get away with it for the rest of your life. But let's be real. Again, your phone typically needs an overnight charge. So do you. So 7 to 9 hours, 7 to 8, according to science research, but 7 to 9 hours roughly, making sure you can hit that. And especially, it's always hard, especially if you have like, family members or children, especially it gets really difficult, but like kind of setting up a routine, set a schedule, like they have to care about your sleep as much as you care about theirs. Just making sure you're getting that, right? Prioritizing it one way or another. So those are like the science-backed things where you can do like actively to like make sure you're getting your little recharge, your rejuvenation, if you will. The next important thing, and this is something that you don't really ever think about, right? Is we have this notion of like, okay, how can I succeed? Right? Like, what do I need to do to get to XYZ, to, get to 1,000 followers or subscribers, to grow a podcast, to grow a stream, to do whatever the heck you want, right? Start a business. Yet we forget to ask ourselves, what do I want my life to look like? We forget that. And we have to realize that, yes, we can sprint for a short period of time, but at the end of the day, life's a marathon, not a sprint, right? You need to pace yourself. And sure, you might have a burst of energy, at mile 21, but guess what? You still got 23, 24, 25, and a little bit of 26 to go. So you got to make sure you're setting yourself up to live a productive yet, a life that you're able to not have to worry about burning out or, burning the candle at two ends and then dealing with it later. Because you got to deal with it now. Like I said, you got to set yourself up for success first. But yeah, like it's one of those where, once you've kind of done all that, like find something you enjoy doing and make sure you take the time to do it, right? Try learn a new skill, immerse yourself in a new country, go travel, right? Learn new cultures, smoke some more meats, do a 50 rep challenge, whatever, right? Like you can do whatever you really want, but just something that you enjoy. Like I know for you, Davey, it's streaming, right? and entertaining, and that's just like your whole shtick. Kevin, you're an anomaly. I don't know what you like. If you want to enlighten us, I'm fine with that too.
Something to
Nah.
do with aloe.
Playing some games, playing some Risk Legacy. Even though I haven't won, but darn you. But like just finding what you enjoy and just do it. Right? Like what is theoretically stopping you? And then really the only excuse right now is like travel and pandemic. Like, okay, I get that. Like, but that's gonna come around eventually. Like, it's not gonna be that way for the rest of your life. Hopefully, you'll be able to get around it. But but then yeah, like once you have that, you need to set yourself up for success. You need to establish ground rules, right? To shift your priorities from your work, your school, whatever projects you're working on, to yourself and those around you. Couple of like ideas for rules that people have done is like shut down your computer no later than like 6 p.m. every day. Never bringing your laptop, your work laptop home. Deleting email from your personal phone. No work on Saturdays. No screens in bed. Set time boundaries for whenever you're available to let your mind unwind. You need at some point to take that time off. And the most important thing that you can do is when you're looking at taking that break and trying to figure out what that really looks like. A couple of questions for you. How much time do you need? What will that break look like? And how often do you need to take breaks? Those are the 3 key questions that you can ask yourself to start figuring out what it is you want to do to get yourself away from work, to get yourself away from school, to not worry about, whatever needs to be done and just enjoy yourself. Right? Because we need that time to disconnect. It's not okay. And even though society says otherwise, but it's not okay to continually work yourself, as you mentioned, to the bone. Because once you get there, you gotta cut the bone and break bones, and that's not fun. I think. I've never broken a bone, so I don't know, but not planning on it anytime soon. So, you need to step away, and it really is one of those where it's like, it's not just like, oh, hey, I'll take care of work, from Aruba or, Virgin Islands or whatever, right? Like, you need to cut it off.
Yeah.
Like, clean separation. Don't check your emails. Don't check phone calls. Just literally disconnect entirely. And unfortunately, you can't control our thoughts, and it is going to eventually, you probably will creep in your mind, but like, do your best to not really think about it and just be present in the moment. A good example of something that eventually I want to start doing is like take a monthly weekend camping trip, specifically where reception is terrible. Because guess what? You don't get the urge to check your phone if you don't have reception.
It's true.
So it's like just being able to disconnect and be present. And build the those memories and just get away from it. Kind of the last one, right? The doomsday, right? If you're unable through everything before it, right? If you're unable to find that happy medium at work, if you're unable to really change the way you go about things, and it's still not working, I think at that point you got to have an honest discussion with yourself. You can either do really realistically one of 2 things at that point. Either change your job hours if that's possible. Most cases, it's probably not. And at that point, change jobs. Find something else. Because the more you stick to it, the worse it's going to become for you. Frankly. So that is how you can overcome burnout. I think it's pretty comprehensive. I talked a lot, but covered a lot of ground. Did a lot of research.
I know with job hours, there's like every person's different. So sometimes it's a matter of finding a job that just has the hours that work for you. And I know a lot of jobs that like succeed well with taking care of burnout don't follow the typical 8 hours a week, 5 days a week. Like I know a lot of jobs that do the 4 days a week, 10 hours a week or 10 hours a day have a significantly less amount of burnout because there's just more time for people to de-stress. And then other jobs that may do like you work this whole time for 3 months, but then you're off for 3 months, also find massive success in their employees because there's just that time to peel away.
When I was at Uber, there was someone I was talking to that I was helping out. He worked in the Middle East, and he would only work for 3 months at a time and then take 3 months off, which is kind of like crazy, but also like really cool. Yeah, and then the other thing too, especially like when like jobs like taking care of like burnout, like when I was at Uber, one of the we'd have obviously weekly one-on-ones or bi-weekly one-on-ones, and one of the questions that they would always ask is, all right, work aside, like I don't care about work. A, what do you have going on in your personal life? B, what can I do to help with that? And they were really conscientious, and especially these major companies are starting to get better at it. We just obviously need to get the smaller companies to do the same, but it's obviously a lot more difficult.
And a lot of the bigger companies too.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Amazon.
Everyone, frankly. Hey, it's okay. They have the screaming booth now, so.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. In the middle of the warehouse.
Yeah. But it is one of those where like you definitely, it needs to be a two-way street, right? We can't, as employees, expect to be in charge and try and control that all the time, right? If we're being set up for failure, we can do our best, but at the end of the day, we're gonna fail.
Yeah.
So just having that knowledge and having that be that two-way street. If you are an employer, talk about it more. Hopefully you can build that personal connection and be like, yo, like, what do you need? Like, how can I help? Because it goes a long way to employee morale, and like I said, it hopefully can prevent burnout and keep people motivated, keep people interested.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely the most important thing, I think, for all of us. To make sure that we're not burning out. Because we have a tendency to do so without even thinking about it. And it's funny because kind of going through all the burnout and everything, there is a time where I was actually, I was working full-time, going to school full-time. For a lot of my full-time career, frankly. It was probably 2016 onward. I've been doing full-time of both for the most part. But I think there was one semester in particular that I can think of. To this day, I have no idea how I didn't get burnout. Maybe because I knew it was just going to be a 4-month period of hell, but I'll get through it, right? That sprint. And maybe it was just, I literally tried to do the bare minimum to pass. I knew there was like a couple classes. I'm like, look, I just need a C in that class and I'm okay with it just to get the credit, and then prioritizing the other classes, right? But it was a crazy schedule. I was working for a computer manufacturer, which was about 30 to 45 minutes away from work and school. So I would Mondays and Wednesdays go into class at 7 a.m., go out of class, go straight to work, go home. And then Tuesdays, Thursdays, I had night classes. So I'd go in about 7 o'clock-ish. It was like 6:50 or like whatever random time, janky time they have, till like 10 o'clock at night. Then go home. And then I had a Saturday class, which was 8 to 12. On top of 2 online classes, I think. So I think just setting the ground rules and like expectations of like, okay, that class I just need to see. That class I can maybe do a little bit of cheating or something. Maybe grade buffering, if you will, right? Extra credit, do it, especially early, because if you can, because that way you build yourself that buffer, frankly, to like slack off a little bit. The 7 o'clock class, I had taken that professor the semester before, so I kind of knew his style. I only knew I had to just show up, sign the attendance paper, and then just focus on the 4 exams that he had and a paper. But yeah, so I'm like, I was literally just like, okay, how can I do this the most efficiently way possible to do the very bare minimum that I can to make sure I do well in all these classes? Somehow passed every single class, and I don't know how. But, it's, like I mentioned, set those rules, set those boundaries. Like, especially if you're preparing for a sprint, come up with a game plan. It'll save you in the end. You're going to have some sleepless nights, which thankfully I didn't have too many. Because the nice thing was, especially for the 7 a.m. class, that was the one I was really most particular about, because as much as I like to think I'm a morning person, I'm not, let's be honest. I'm like a midday person, realistically. But I knew the way his system was, he built in, like, you can miss like a total of 3 days and still get full credit for attendance. So if there was just a day where I'm just like, I'm dead tired, I'll just miss it. I think I missed like 4 days in total, but still ended up passing with an A. Not a problem. I did fail the first exam, but he doubled the final if you did better, and if it was in your interest, and I just aced that, so it was fine. You'll learn the system, right? You read the syllabi, and figure it out. For those of you who are doing the school thing, read the syllabi, find where you can cut corners, but still pass. Pro tips with Josh. And listen to our Is Higher Education episode for you. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add, but I'm tired of hearing myself talk, so.
No, you were pretty comprehensive in all of it. I feel like you covered most of the bases there.
Yeah, I said I definitely want to do a follow-up episode on stress, because I only scratched the surface of stress in this episode, even though a lot of it is kind of applicable.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, very fascinating in the science. And like I said, it was very enjoyable doing the research on this.
Cool.
It was very fun. So hopefully you guys at home and girls and everyone else enjoyed it, and didn't mind me talking for a lot. But before we head out, if you did appreciate it, hey, make sure to give us a like, give us a comment, maybe give us a rating if you're on the podcast platforms. It helps us out tremendously, because a lot of work does go into these episodes, and will continue to go into these episodes, because I think these are discussions that need to be had, frankly. Other than that, you can follow us on the socials at Audible Anomaly, and you can always shoot us an email at audibleanomaly@gmail.com. With that said, let's go around and do some plugs. Davey, what are you working on? Where can we find your Final Fantasy gameplay?
You can find that at twitch.tv/DPRLtron. It's also DPRLtron on any of the social media, so if you wish to follow me there, you can. I don't post much, but you're welcome to follow me. Maybe encourage me to post more, period.
Feel that. All right, how about you, Kev?
Not really working on anything, but you can always catch me with an oversized butterfly net.
This is true. Mm-hmm. We'll need to try that. And for me, I mean, obviously, just follow us on Audible Anomaly and everything. But if you want to follow me personally, You can catch me on Bromium404 on YouTube and at Bromium wherever you get your social media. That's going to wrap it up for this week. Next week, we're going to shift a little bit and talk about how to maintain friendships and those kinds of relationships. So it's going to be an interesting episode. There is some correlation between, building your support structure and that episode. So we'll get into that a little bit more, and we'll talk about how we maintain our friendship as well. Definitely avoiding playing Risk Legacy, I think, is the key. It took us 8 years to play almost 8 years to play the second round. Hopefully it won't take us that long for the next one. But until then, you can catch us next week when we talk at you then. But until then, we have been Audible Anomaly. Hope everyone's having a safe and cool weekend. Other than that, we'll talk at you next week. Bye!